then I'll turn to the questions. So on my left, starting from my left, we have Dr. Anthony Costa, who is the head of secretariat at the B20 South Africa. Then sitting next to him is David Carber, who is the CEO of European Development Finance Institutions Associations. Then we have Dr. Slim Feriani, who is the managing partner at Alternative Path Partners. Then we have Mr. El Hassana Kaba, who is the founder and CEO of Mansa Bank. And finally, we have Mr. Ben Swinkels, who is the chairman of Africa Invest. Let me, I'm not going to say any word of introduction, just perhaps to stress that what Didier was saying, that this question of subsidiarity and complementarity is very important. I think for many private financiers, also the question of additionality is perhaps a key element, so that the public intervention do not crowd out private sector, but do crowd in private sector. And that's, let me turn to Dr. Slim Feriani. In fact, your activities are focused on mobilizing long-term capital, patient capital in Africa. Could you tell us perhaps, how you see this approach could be scaled up at the African level in order to really reach a transformation in Africa?
Thank you very much, San. Patience is a virtue, so thank you for being so patient all day long. Save the best for last. I'm told there may be another panel. I don't know if there will be one, but can I have an idea about how much time you have? Because it's true. I can speak for 2 hours, like I can speak for 10 minutes.
Go under 5:30,
Anyone?
Is that correct?
Sorry?
5:30?
5:30.
And I don't think that's
We have 45
before that, so we'll give him the floor also before that, but until 5:30, unless the organizers are jumping on me, they're saying it's perfect.
Thank you so much, because as you may appreciate, I came all the way from London, not necessarily from Abidjan with other places, but I think we're all so passionate and excited about this topic, about this theme, about this conference, and therefore we want to have a bit of their time. So thank you for bearing with us. And first of all, Your Excellency, Mr. Minister, a new brother from Zambia. It's a pity that I don't think we have His Excellency the President, amazing speeches. But let me just first of all thank you very much, and let me start by thanking the organizers, particularly Vivanu and Adebisi. I don't see either of them, but it's okay. My message will get to them hopefully. So thank you for bringing us all together today, and for creating an initiative and a forum that allows these conversations to happen. Now, because ultimately, progress is also about collective momentum. L'union fait la force and strength in numbers. So this is what it's all about. Now, this is the tip of the iceberg. There were many more people yesterday in the museum, and maybe because they were trapped there, and now they're all over the place and all over town. So that's the downside of being in a hotel.
How do we mobilize long-term?
Yeah, I'll get there. Yeah. So I'm budgeting 4 minutes. So first of all, I'll start by single most important reality, and that's Africa represents roughly 20% of the world's population, less than 3% of global GDP, and even smaller share of global investment portfolios. Yet, the continent is not short on capital, as mentioned by quite a few people already. For example, talking about $1 trillion plus in pension and central bank reserves, etc. So the issue is not capital scarcity in Africa. Africa does not lack capital. It's more about capital choreography. It lacks efficient channels to deploy capital at scale. And we don't need more capital. I think we could say that bluntly. We need better plumbing and pipes for Africa. And that's not a theoretical issue. It's fundamentally an execution issue. Because ultimately ideas, strategies, and even the best of intentions don't transform economies on their own. Capital does. Cash is king, money talks. And it's what turns projects on paper into projects in reality, and that's part of what was discussed by Minister Nabi earlier. Capital supports entrepreneurship and drives real economic transformation. So how do we mobilize patient long-term capital at scale for structural transformation, aside of how we do it, obviously, at alternative path partners in general. I'll say that there are at least 4 ways that we need to think of here, practically speaking. And that's, first of all, it's not just about having projects, it's about having investable and bankable pipelines. Because many countries will rightly say we have projects, we need capital, that's true, but from an investor's perspective, it's critical, there's a critical difference between a project pipeline and investable and bankable pipeline. And having been minister back in Tunisia many years ago, that was a key issue discussed with DFIs, how to make projects bankable. So capital does not fund ideas.
If you just allow me to pick up on that one. I mean, because I hear international financiers saying that there are not enough bankable projects in Africa. And I hear Africans saying we have plenty of bankable projects, but we don't have the capital flowing into that. Could you share some lights into that dilemma?
I'll give you one example. For example, solar projects. I've launched the solar projects, the 2030 vision, and we had to implement the PPA. So having the PPA, and we worked with the EBRD and IFC, and that was the game changer. So again, it may not sound like rocket science, but it's feasible again. So that's an example, and that's what I mean by turning projects from an idea or a project into a bankable, investable project. So that's one example, and many more apply the same way. So the issue is not necessarily absence of projects; it's the conversion of these projects once again into investable opportunities at scale. Second of all, it's creating more and better vehicles. And the piping and the plumbing I was referring to. So institutional investors, whether it's pension funds or sovereign investors, etc., they cannot necessarily invest directly into fragmented project risks. So they need structural platforms with the right governance and transparency and scale. And I'm going to summarize. So third, using public capital to crowd in private capital. That's a theme that was mentioned earlier by my friend and brother TGA. But this is where NAFA is really critical, the new African financial architecture, because African multilaterals and DFIs and sovereign institutions, they must play a catalytic role through, for example, guarantees, first loss capital, and co-investment frameworks to crowd in private capital at scale. And fourth, I'd say mobilizing domestic African capital much more effectively, because once again, the figure of 1 trillion plus has been mentioned. So the issue is not mobilization, but it's really intermediation and allocation, and how do we channel these African savings. I discussed earlier with my new brother in Abidjan from Hansa about how to mobilize, therefore, African savings into African growth. How do we channel them? Not just mobilize them, how do we channel African savings into African growth? And importantly, there's no shame in learning from others and getting inspired by others. Countries like Chile, Poland, or Australia, to name just a few, have shown how domestic institutional capital, particularly pension systems, can become a cornerstone of economic development and a game changer for capital market deepening. So these systems did not emerge overnight, and they were built through strong governance, regulation, discipline, etc., and they have fundamentally transformed these economies. Africa, we're seeing some green shoots in Morocco, in South Africa, and that's the way to go. We need to have some examples to follow. So ultimately, once again, going back to this, the answer is not theoretical, it's an execution. And that's an execution challenge. So, and I think we need to move from mobilizing into orchestrating capital. That's what it's all about, because for the time being, there's a lot of fragmentation.
So thanks a lot. Let me, since you mentioned Mr. Sanakaba, and doing the practice. So you've set up a bank, and then you have yourself a banker for a very long time. How do you capture these domestic savings and to do the investment? What are the challenges and also opportunities that you found out since you also set up the Mansa Bank? What do you think were the hurdles you had to try to overcome and to access to the potentials in Africa? Could you share some of these experiences that you have gained?
Bien sûr, thank you. Je pense que la question était quels sont les challenges que les banques commerciales en Afrique font face. J'ai demandé à mes équipes juste de demander à l'intelligence artificielle de se sortir les réponses. Et comme vous le savez, l'IA donne des réponses sur la base de données qui sont déjà collectées. Donc l'IA boutique et je pense que c'est ce que dit Amélie, c'est ce que beaucoup de personnes encore pensent en cette perception. Il y a un outil que les challenges que les banques commerciales doivent faire face en Afrique, il y a d'abord le contexte macroéconomique, il y a les pressions sur les monnaies. Je voudrais que dans mon cas, ce qu'il y a dit, c'est pas vrai. Parce que quand on prend un pays comme la Côte d'Ivoire, depuis ces 15 dernières années, le taux d'inflation, il est en dessous de 3%. Le pays de croissance, qui est l'une des meilleures croissances au monde, la zone est régulée. Donc, je dirais, j'ai pas de pression macroéconomique, j'ai pas de pression des currencies, la monnaie se comporte bien, elle est stable, elle est forte. Donc voilà, je dis donc ça, ce préjugé n'est pas vrai déjà.
Il faut pas suivre les
Parce que on a les mêmes données qu'il y a 20 ans, qu'il y a 30 ans. Le monde change, le monde bouge. Il y a de nouvelles technologies. Et on nous dit encore qu'en Afrique, quand on ouvre une banque, pour ouvrir une agence, c'est compliqué, c'est cher. Et effectivement, le cost d'implémentation d'une banque, le réseau coûte cher dans le coût opérationnel. Ce qui paye. C'était vrai en 90, c'était vrai peut-être au début des années 2000. Mais maintenant, chacun de nous ici, notre banque, c'est notre smartphone. Donc, je n'ai plus ce coût-là déjà. Donc, ce coût-là, quand on me dit que c'est un challenge, c'est faux. Ce n'est plus un challenge. On veut parler de capital humain. Je pense que la plupart de ceux qui sont ici ont fait les meilleures études. Hein. Bon, le capital humain, nous avons une jeunesse bien formée et qui n'a de complexe vis-à-vis de personne. Donc, ce qui était vrai il y a 15 ans, il y a 20 ans, sortons de cela. Et c'est pourquoi le thème de ce forum qui dit Force of the Future. Le futur, c'est pas d'être stick sur nos préjugés du passé. Donc quand on clame ensemble, on tient compte de ces réalités-là.
Mais donc, qu'est-ce que vous faites différemment?
Voilà. Et donc voilà, j'arrive. Donc, j'aime bien la théorie il y a une théorie qui dit la théorie de l'arrélation. Ou l'avantage d'être des derniers venus sur un marché. Quand on vient sur un marché en dernière position, on a l'avantage de tirer des leçons des erreurs des tout premiers. On s'appuie sur les technologies et on fait ce qu'on appelle des leapfrogs. Ce qui a fait que je montre ça. Quand on ouvre, en 6 ans, on a pu faire ce que des banques qui sont présentes n'ont pas fait en 30 ans. J'ai dit en 30 ans. Avec des centaines de staff. Avec beaucoup d'agences. Comment? Parce qu'on s'appuie sur les technologies, des nouvelles technologies. Ce qui fait qu'en 6 ans, on a fait beaucoup mieux en termes de productivité, avec seulement 70 personnes. Une taille des bénéfices qui dépasse de milliards de dollars. Parce que on a fait les changements, on a une technologie qu'on adopte. Maintenant, je dirais, la principale difficulté aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas tout ça. Tout à l'heure, Didier l'a dit, notre principale difficulté, c'est la ressource, la liquidité. Mon collègue vient de le dire aussi. Avoir accès à de la ressource longue pour faire des bons financements. Aujourd'hui, et cela aussi est lié au fait que nos marchés, nos populations ne sont pas assez bancarisées. Et tant que nous n'allons pas avoir un taux de bancarisation conséquent, il serait difficile de mobiliser l'épargne domestique. Mais de plus en plus, les choses changent. Avec les fintech, les telcos, le mobile banking, tout le monde a aujourd'hui un compte mobile. Ce compte mobile, que les ménages ont, que les planteurs ont, que les jeunes ont, c'est comment faire maintenant des outils de saving. Comment créer des pension fonds, des compagnies d'assurance, parce que, in fine, les banques ne pourront pas financer l'equity. L'equity sera financé par les pension fonds, par des fonds souverains, ou aussi par de l'épargne longue. Donc, je dis, aujourd'hui, notre principale difficulté ou souci, c'est pas la qualité du portefeuille, les data. Aujourd'hui, j'ai des data scientists à la banque qui analysent le comportement de nos clients, qui analysent le comportement des clients de nos clients. Donc, tout ce qui était vrai il y a 20 ans, 30 ans, n'est plus vrai aujourd'hui. Par contre, le fait que nos marchés ne soient pas assez bancarisés, qu'il y ait plus de 50% de la population en dehors des systèmes bancaires, pour moi, c'est le véritable problème. Et c'est là où on doit aller chercher la liquidité et la ressource. Si j'ai la liquidité, si j'ai la ressource, et c'est ce que tout à l'heure a dit Didier, comme ils sont en train de le dire, si la RDB ou les structures, les banques de développement régional nous donnent de la ressource, on sait comment financer ces lois.
Et alors, vous avez, en tant que, parce que votre banque Manza Bank a 5-6 ans?
6 ans.
6 ans. On m'a dit que parfois c'est difficile pour les entrepreneurs et ceux qui veulent innover en Afrique. Comment vous avez réussi à construire votre banque? Vous avez réussi à trouver des financements?
Nabil, je te dirais, il n'y a aucun marché facile. Ce n'est pas que l'Afrique, partout au monde, c'est difficile d'innover.
Ah, on dit que c'est plus facile aux États-Unis qu'en Europe, par exemple.
Mais quand tu innoves, ce que tu innoves, d'autres vont trouver aussi d'autres innovations. Donc, ce que tu as donné hier, demain peut disparaître. Donc, en fait, ce que je suis en train de dire, c'est qu'il faut savoir s'adapter. Charles Darwin dit, ceux qui survivent, c'est pas ceux qui sont les plus forts, c'est pas ceux qui sont les plus intelligents, c'est ceux qui savent s'adapter. Donc, je dirais, on s'est adapté, on est flexible. Parce que aussi, on a fait en sorte d'avoir des tissus d'actionnaires locaux qui comprennent l'environnement. Moi, je m'en sers quand j'ai une difficulté, ma décision se prend pas à New York et à Paris, et à Abidjan.
Vos actionnaires sont uniquement africains.
C'est ce que j'ai voulu faire. Parce que j'ai travaillé longtemps pour les banques internationales. 100%, et c'était l'un de mes challenges, créer une banque d'études à 100% par les capitaux de la région. Parce que ils comprennent les dynamiques, ils comprennent les contingences. Donc c'est un peu ça aussi qui fait que on fait la différence. Parce qu'on comprend le marché, on sait où aller. Quand j'étais dans d'autres banques américaines ou britanniques, il y a des financements. Lorsqu'on devait faire ces financements, mais celui qui est assis à New York ou qui est assis à Londres, il dit non, it's too risky. Qu'est-ce qui est too risky? Il fait KO, les pays vivent ça.
Et alors, comment vous assurez, c'est la dernière question, alors je passe à notre intervenant, mais comment vous assurez que votre approche est vraiment inclusive pour aussi les producteurs locaux, les acteurs locaux, qui souvent, justement, le système bancaire traditionnel dit c'est trop risqué, on veut pas, on préfère prêter au gouvernement.
Merci David, très très bonne question. En fait, ce qu'on se dit, lorsqu'on commence la banque, on dit step by step. Ce que je fais, je prends le cas des planteurs. Il est difficile effectivement d'aller dire rapidement je vais financer un planteur. Par contre, le planteur, sa récolte, il va à une entreprise qui exporte. Cette entreprise, je l'ai dans mon portefeuille. Je lui dis écoute, tiens, il n'est plus question de parler seulement de loan. Laissons le crédit, c'est pas de l'authentification. Il faut créer un écosystème. Donc je prends cette entreprise qui exporte de cacao. Je dis écoute, tes producteurs, tes fournisseurs sont tes planteurs. Tes fournisseurs, ces fournisseurs, tu as leur donné. Tu sais, chaque année, que ce planteur qui est dans telle zone te donne peut-être ton âge, cacao par exemple. Donc, ce planteur, j'ai cette donnée-là. Donc, quand je finance ce client, je dis, écoute, le next step maintenant, c'est pas que de te financer toi, c'est de faire en sorte que ce planteur que tu as dans ton portefeuille, comment je peux l'accompagner? Donc, c'est le value chain financing. Donc, ce qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, on fait cette différence avec cette approche-là. D'abord, on commence avec les wholesale, du B2B. Et après, lorsqu'on a ces clients dans ces grandes entreprises, on rentre dans l'écosystème et nous, on les mettons même dans le système formel. Et comment on le fait? Grâce à la technologie, à d'autres applications. Donc, je dis, avec la technologie et le progrès, tout ce qui n'était pas faisable il y a 10 ans, il y a 20 ans, aujourd'hui, on peut le faire. Et donc, c'est un peu ce qu'on fait. On passe par, on fait des écosystèmes, des clusters avec d'autres grands clients. Et quand on prend les clusters, tout ce qui est chaîne de valeur, leurs fournisseurs, leurs clients, nous essayons de les accompagner.
Merci beaucoup. Let me turn to David Kerper. But David, I know you have to leave, I think, around 5:15. So thanks a lot for staying with us. I mean, at EFI, the Associations of European DFIs, I mean, you are there to try to help create local or strengthen local capital markets in developing countries. And you also, I understand, try to mobilize institutional finances and long-term capitals. Can you tell us a bit what is your approach and how you try to do that in working with local actors? With the microphone, it's easier.
Well, that's one of our first instruments is to have a microphone to do this. Yeah, and really, I really appreciate what was said before. I can be quite short actually, because I think that yes, we are deal financiers. We are there to mobilize capitals, and our mandate to actually go where no one has gone before, but make sure that others follow. That's the simple rule of mobilization. But in particular, like was also Dr. Feriani has said, the essence is orchestrating, and we play a role in both the orchestration and sometimes we are the choreographer, and that's where I, in particular, think that DFI should do more, especially in these radical, uncertain times, especially with the global macroeconomic turmoil, is to play that role not only from a perspective of what we finance and that eventually we need to mobilize the structure of the deals, but that in between, with lend finance facilities as a vehicle for processing and managing guarantees, we help orchestrate. And that is extremely important, and it actually requires a transformation agenda also in the DFIs. And an essential part of that transformation is partnerships, in particular with public actors. I think that in particular, we're sitting here in Brussels, the European Commission and the European Union institutions can play an enormous, important role as a choreographer of these types of investments. What I would like to emphasize here is basically there's one observation and one law, I would almost say, like that, like a law of nature. The observation is, and it's been said before, Africa does not suffer from a lack of savings. Africa actually suffers from a disconnect between these savings and productive investment. That's just the basis of any answer I think you hear on this panel. We all agree on that. The second thing is, and Dr. Feriani also referred to that a bit, is there is almost like a historic law that says foreign capital follows domestic capital. And you refer to Poland as an example, and actually this entire continent after World War II, the reconstruction of Europe, it was domestic capital that played a role immediately. And it was in 1948, with the help of the World Bank, that foreign capital, particularly Wall Street, got sensitized and started to get confidence again to invest in Europe. And I've never understood why that rule has never been followed consistently in the past 30 years. And I still don't understand that. And now I see the prominence of that law coming back. I like that. But we need to start really orchestrating it, and that means that DFIs need to go to Africa. You see a slow localization jet already. It should be faster to find the domestic capital partners and to let those partners also benefit from that wide range of concessional finance instruments that we have. So with that, I really would like to emphasize this. I do think that we need to work a lot more with local savings, with local pension funds, insurance companies, and I think it's one of the largest challenges that we see in the coming year is to make sure that the various concessional finance instruments that we have are actually there also to the benefit of those domestic partners.
Could you explain just a little bit what you mean by your role as orchestrator? Because orchestrating sometimes gives the feeling that you have the conductor that says what the other players should be doing. But at the same time, you were saying that you should follow the local actors and not necessarily be the conductor. So could you perhaps elaborate on what is your concept of orchestration in partnership?
Yeah, that's actually, so now we're gonna really move this metaphor to the edge. And,
I'm using the one you
know, I like that.
And we talk about African financing.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Why European DFIs would orchestrate the financing in Africa? If you want me to ask the question more bluntly.
I think actually in the majority of cases we're part of the concert. We're part of the orchestra. But because we have a pioneering mandate, and you see that particularly in frontier markets, in fragile and conflict affairs, sometimes we need to orchestrate. And just to give you an example that makes it clear when we are the leader of the orchestra is really in these early blended finance vehicles that we set up in Ambas. Looking at, for instance, I used to work for 5 years at FMO. Ben knows that place very well. At FMO, an offshoot of FMO set up Climate Investor 1, Climate Investor 2, etc. These blended finance facilities were extremely important, and that's a example of how to orchestrate origination with an operational facility, and then also a co-financing facility to sell it on, to make it, once it's fully operational, to actually create the assets so that others can buy it. That's an extremely important example of orchestration. And sometimes, actually most of the times, I think we're part of it, but then we need to let the orchestra that we're part of benefit also from the instruments that we have.
Thanks, great to stretch. No, this is to stretch the metaphor, and it is very nice. Let me turn to your compatriot Bert Zwinkel, who also, I understand, he was your former colleague, because you also been worked many years at FMO before before becoming the chairman of Africa Invest. You have been in the business for a long time, and I'm sure this is not your first discussion about mobilization of capitals. What are some of the lessons, the pitfalls that you think should be avoided, and what are some of the innovative approaches in order to better crowding capital in Africa that can be followed?
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, I have been a long time already in financial sector, working for FMO and later 17 years as chairman of Africa Invest. Right from 1991, when we got money from the Dutch government to facilitate, likewise what Mr. Kuiper said, facilitate as a seed capital, I was free and very quick in investing in 25 small banks. And those banks were everywhere in Africa, even in Zambia, but also in Burkina Faso when we started with a French guy in 1996 with investing in the Bank of Africa. And I keep this as an example. The Bank of Africa, I was 22 years, which is not correct in compliance, the corporate governance compliance, but I was 22 years board member of the group, but I was also board member in Madagascar, Djibouti, Burkina Faso, Senegal, and also in Benin. And what I learned from that is it is not orchestration what you have said. I think it's spontaneously I met during my trips in Africa, bright young guys, and one of the example I can say he's, for example, Edward Effa. Edward Effa was a Dutch Ghana guy in Accra. I met him in the hotel, and I said, well, what can we do? He wanted to create a small bank, a small bank. Now, the Fidelity Bank is one of the biggest banks in Ghana. Very successful. It started with...
But you're not answering my question and it's very interesting, but you're not answering my question of what are some of the, out of all this experience, what are some of the pitfalls that one should, avoid, and what are some of the innovations that, in your view, should be fostered?
Yes, I have your question, and I know that you're correcting also my colleague, because we went in a different way to English. But I wanted to say the past is leading to the future. And the past was the pitfalls. I don't think it was pitfalls. We met a lot of entrepreneurial young generation Africans. And I think that will be repeated again. I think he has not the same age as me, and he started 6 years ago. And I believe that it will be continued. So,
let's be a bit, sorry, I'm pushing you a little bit, because we did have a preparation before this panel, and you were telling me that, we are a bit too bureaucratic in the approach and administrative, and we need to do it in different ways. So now it's the end of the conference. Let's put the cards on the table and tell us really what you have observed and what could be done better. We want to look at the future, not necessarily make an assessment of the past, but learning lessons from the past to be better in the future. So
that is been said. I think to grow to this new architecture, I think you need to work with very good local entrepreneurs, which has started to create it, but also a new generation will come. And I think it's very important that those new generation are now coming much more in banking, in the architecture of digitalization, as what my colleague has said here on the table. And I believe that I don't see easy pitfalls, because now new banks are really entering in a platform, digitalized platform, and that way of is avoiding a lot of critical things. Okay, Yes, thanks a lot, David. Yes, thank you.
David is an appointment, so
Because I know,
that he could leave it. That's okay.
yes. So I believe that we will continue in a different way than in the past. So I believe that what we have done in the past will be repeated in a completely different way. So this is my answer to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. One of the issues and I think you're working next to the CEO of the Mansabad, that is an example of perhaps new approaches also that we could see. Well, one of the elements that we have heard quite a lot, partly at the beginning of these panels, but also earlier during the conference, is the problem of the risk perception in Africa, and we realize from African actors that when they invest, it's not really risky, but for international investors, it's perceived as being quite risky. So they say, "Oh, we need to get a risk premium," and we heard Guinea before said the minister is saying that they want to be put a less risky category, and they need to discuss with the credit agencies, and the second element is that because also of this risk perception and other perhaps issues of lack of liquidity, that the cost of capital is very high in Africa, which means that when we want to develop and grow in Africa, in fact, Africa, as if money talks, the talks is much more difficult in Africa because it's much more expensive as a result to try to mobilize. So, Dr. Costa, you have quite a lot of experience on the policy setting, being part of the B20. What were some of your recommendations of how to try to address this challenge?
Thank you. And as the last entrant to the discussion, I'll learn from Mansa Bank and the experience of my colleagues here, and I will avoid metaphors and I will answer the questions where we to order. I think we've certainly noticed this issue has been raised, and we found there's a gap between risk, actual risk, and perception. So in the B20's task force, which made recommendations to the G20 during Salvador's presidency last year, we looked specifically at the data. One of the calls was for a better data repository of the actual experience of borrowers, and quite clearly, borrowers with similar risk ratings, there is an Africa risk premium. We engage with the credit ratings agencies. It's always tricky because they're quite cagey about things, but we did find that there's a new willingness to start to engage, and indeed perception is probably the main factor that drives this. In terms of the recommendations, how we fix this, where this is going, I think we've seen unprecedented scrutiny of this particular issue now. So the G20 picked it up under South Africa's presidency. The Africa Expert Panel, Dent in Growth, has made specific recommendations. It came up against Financing for Development 4 last year in severe consensus. It's going to be discussed at the United Nations ECOSOC next week with the ratings agencies present. So I think hopefully this momentum will lead to a revision, if you like, of the approach that's taken, of the models the ratings agencies themselves use, and indeed the need for ratings agencies to have an on-the-ground presence, not just to place their analysts far from the actual situation. And I think the last point is the recognition of how pernicious this is. So a higher cost of capital creates an increased debt burden that reduces fiscal space. As a result, governments in Africa have less headroom to invest in infrastructure, there's less growth, there's less institutional capacity, and so risk perception goes up, and so we create a vicious cycle.
Let me turn to the bankers. I mean, how do you address this risk dimension in your business? Do you rely on credit rating agencies, or on the contrary, finding the opportunities because you know better than markets? But Feriani, you want to
Risk specific.
on risk?
Yes.
And then if you want also to react to what other
One word. I think it's more about risk calibration, in the sense that not eliminating risk completely. There's nothing like zero risk in the world, but sharing it intelligence. This is why we like the Crowdesian
proposition that we build our fund around having a diversified multi-asset exposure reduces risk. It's our way to do things. There are many other ways. So, and I'll pass on to the back because therefore risk is different from the risk I'm talking that I present. Fund management, asset management, the portfolio side of things.
In fact, when you are talking about risk, it depends on the counterpart. If you are talking about SMEs risk, for example, we have developed our own tools to assess, their equity worthiness. We, as a local bank, for sure, are rating the same than our country. So then we are not impacted by the Basel II, Basel III rules because we are already a local bank. Then when we are financing some local companies and some, let's say, our own tools apply for sure. So we won't rely on international, rules for sure. They have the same principle everywhere, but at least we can adapt them to our local context. So that's what we did. And that's something how also, you asked me how we were able to perform, when we do have sometimes some international, some international banks. Those international banks, sometimes they face the constraint from Basel II or Basel III. As a local bank, I'm not facing this kind of constraint. That's why I'm still saying my own issue today is liquidity. So I will say, yeah, something also we are also, doing more and more structured finance so that we know how to capture the cash flow just to show the return of the loan we extend. So I will say, we develop our own tools. We are in the market as a local bank. We have no choice. We should be smart enough to be able to find solution and suitable financing for, our clients and our customers.
And you want to say, we can move to another issue. We've heard, and that also related to how to mobilize capital in Africa. We have heard with this new financial architecture. Yeah, but just if you allow me, the last question, on the new African financial architectures, we have heard and did it that very eloquently at the beginning. We have heard a call for greater coordinations between different types of finances. And the experience also in Europe, there's also similar type of efforts, but quite often the different financing actors are complaining about high transaction costs and what is the complementarity. And it seems to be easier to say that we want to work together and to do it in practice. What would be your recommendations of the way forward for the new African financial architecture to stimulate this complementarity while respecting the subsidiarity principles and not having huge, complex transaction costs in this process?
Merci. Je pense que déjà, on le vit, nous quand on crée Mansabank, nous avons des lignes de refinancement avec des banques régionales déjà. Donc, tout à l'heure, il a parlé de la BOAD, qui est une banque régionale de développement, l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Moi, déjà, quand on ouvre Mansabank, je sais que si je vais prendre mon temps pour aller voir d'autres DFI qui sont pas dans la zone, pour lever des fonds en monnaie étrangère, cela va prendre du temps. Et là, je vais développer titre comme mon billet. C'est-à-dire, toujours, le paiement va être payé. Donc, ce que je fais, moi, quand on ouvre Mansabank, on va avoir des banques régionales, comme la BOAD, et nous font des lignes en monnaie locale ou la BIDC par exemple. Donc, donc, je veux dire, aujourd'hui, on le vit déjà. Donc, ce dont Didier a parlé, nous sommes en train de le vivre. Lorsque nous avons des gros dossiers de financement, je me réfère à ces grandes structures, à ces grandes banques qui ont de la liquidité, qui aussi peuvent emprunter sur les marchés internationaux parce que de plus en plus, leur rating est meilleur. Donc, je dirais, on le fait déjà. Nous sommes en train de le faire, nous allons le développer, mais en même temps, il faut que nous arrivions, et c'est un peu notre challenge à nous tous, de faire en sorte que le marché domestique puisse collecter assez de ressources, parce que c'est là la ressource qui est moins chère. Et c'est comme ça, après le taux vont s'en sentir, le taux vont baisser. Et si on n'a que 50% de la population qui n'est que bancarisée, que les autres 50% ne sont pas bancarisés, c'est de l'épargne, c'est de la ressource qui fuit le secteur formel pour vraiment de trouver des solutions, mais c'est ce qu'on fait déjà.
Voilà. So the inclusion of the population, the banking sector or the financial sector, this is the e-condition. Are there some questions from the audience, or everybody's so exhausted? Not yet. Ken?
Merci.
Je représente Pierre Maggi. J'ai eu une expérience longue de la Banque mondiale, beaucoup dans les garanties, mais également au niveau stratégique. Et aussi à la commission pour la mise en œuvre des programmes de garantie. Monsieur Sim est content de vous voir parce que nous avons été à la même université à Washington. La meilleure, directement. La question que j'ai, c'est quelque chose qui n'est pas très bien abordé ici, c'est quand même au niveau des coûts de financement. Parce que vous parlez des PME, les PME à ce jour en Afrique ont des taux prohibitifs en termes de financement. L'autre aspect, c'est également le rôle des institutions financières. En ce moment, on parle de l'Union européenne, des multilatéraux, etc. Il y a un grand montant, surtout en Europe, d'argent gratuit dans le IFS, le programme de garantie. Et je suis désolé, mais les résultats sont même pas moyens. Les déguisements sont vivants.
Pour cette fois, et ça, pour une fois, on est dans une discussion où on se concentre sur l'Afrique.
D'accord.
Ne venons pas avec les problèmes européens.
Ok, je dirais plus le rôle des multilatéraux en termes de mobilisation de financement. Comment atteindre vraiment le secteur privé? Certains arrivent plus ou moins bien, la SFI, Proparco, FMO, mais c'est trop petit, on n'a pas le scale. Et comment que vous, en tant que banquier, ou si vous êtes dans le B20, comment on peut adresser cette question? Voilà.
Je vais répondre d'abord sur le coût et puis
Juste pour la première question, je vais vous poser une question rapidement, et désolé de répondre à une question. À votre avis, quels sont les coûts de financement des PME? Quels sont les taux de financement des PME?
En général, c'est dans les reçus de 10%.
Bon, voilà, donc, non, c'est faux. Encore une fois, c'est la perception qu'on a. C'est pas vrai. Je suis dans une zone d'inflation qui est à 2%, 3%. Les PME, tout au plus, c'est 6%, 7, 8%, dépendant du type de financement. Maintenant, pourquoi ces taux baissent encore? Je le dis encore une fois, on a toujours cette perception de dire que les taux sont élevés. Les taux seront toujours élevés tant qu'on n'aura pas finalisé cette inclusion financière. Parce que le coût de la liquidité est cher. Nous avons peu de fonds de pension. Nous avons il y en a pas beaucoup. Tout le monde va vers ces mêmes fonds de pension. Les compagnies d'assurance qui sont là. Dans tout le secteur financier, en fait, on a les mêmes liability providers. Il y en a pas beaucoup. Donc, c'est la loi de l'offre et de la demande. Il a en face beaucoup de banques commerciales qui veulent de la liquidité. Donc, il va donner des taux qui vont surenchérir, alors que le travail du banquier, c'est d'emprunter un taux et de prêter après des contreparties en prenant sa marge. Donc, si moi-même j'emprunte en tant que banque, si j'emprunte à 6% avec des fonds de pension, mais évidemment, quand je vais prêter, c'est pas à 6%. Je suis pas un banque communiste. Donc, quand je prête à 8%, donc j'ai une marge la même. Maintenant, comment on baisse ce taux-là? Mais plus on aura de dépositors, plus on aura de personnes, plus on aura des ménages qui font des économies, alors les taux vont baisser. C'est pourquoi ici en Occident, les taux sont bas parce que d'abord, on a au moins 100% de personnes qui ont des comptes bancaires. Donc imaginez si tout le monde a un compte bancaire, et même s'il y a 10 euros sur le compte qui reste en saving, 10 euros fois 100 millions, ça fait ce que ça fait. C'est ce qu'il faut. Et c'est pourquoi je passe mon temps à répéter aux uns aux autres que le problème du financement des PME en Afrique, en tout cas en Afrique de l'Ouest, ce n'est pas le problème de garantie. Ce n'est pas le problème c'est vraiment la liquidité. Parce que si j'ai la liquidité, je saurais structurer le financement pour que ils puissent me rembourser. Par contre, tant que je ne passe cette liquidité à bon marché, à bon taux, les taux seront ce que vont le taux auquel me prêtent les fonds de pension ou les fonds de retraite auxquels je mets ma marge. Mais je pense que réellement, cela dépend des zones. Dans les zones peu inflationnistes, les taux sont assez bas. Comme je dis, dans ma zone, le taux d'inflation à 3%, notre taux directeur de la BCAO, c'est à 3%, donc le taux des PME, vraiment oxy entre 6 et 8%, dépendant des financements. Et maintenant, rapidement, je finis vite dessus. Je pense que les PME, le problème surtout, c'est que pendant qu'ils ont besoin de CAPEX, et comme les banques n'ont pas de la ressource longue, on ne fait que des prêts court terme. Et là, c'est dommage, parce qu'on ne règle pas le problème.
Et alors, juste, je demande à chacun des pénalistes Adelis, de conclure, mais votre recommandation pour traiter ce problème de liquidité, ce serait quoi? Si on voit dans le futur, comment adresser ce problème de liquidité?
Je pense que déjà, on y arrive. Je pense que déjà avec les banques, les fintechs, tout ce qui est open banking, ce qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, avec la dictée, avec tout ce qui est digitalisation, moi aujourd'hui, ma clientèle que je suis en train d'avoir, ce sont des gens qui se déplacent pas, qui, grâce aux nouvelles technologies, sont en train d'avoir des comptes bancaires, sont en train d'avoir de l'argent qui dort dans les mobile banking, dans les mobile pockets. Donc je dis aujourd'hui, on y est, on est engagé. Je prends le cas de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, la BCE a lancé un programme de dire paiement instantané, autant les banques et les opérateurs et les fintechs, on vous oblige à faire en sorte que tout le monde puisse faire les transferts de façon instantanée et à zéro frais. Donc à un moment donné, il faut comprendre que on ne peut pas rester dans la sensibilité. Il faut obliger les citoyens aussi à sauter le pas. Mais aussi à quel coût? Aujourd'hui, je dirais, il y a des efforts qui sont en train d'être faits pour que cette inclusion financière soit totalement différente. Je serai là peut-être dans 2 ans. Je vous dirai qu'aujourd'hui, par exemple, grâce à ce qui est en train d'être fait, les choses changent. Donc je dis, les choses avancent, les choses changent. Les actions sont prises par les banques centrales pour que l'inclusion financière soit véritable.
Parfait. On prend rendez-vous dans 2 ans pour que vous... Ben?
Oui, je crois que, sorry, I'm English. I believe that you can improve your liquidity by really working.
Conditions.
Huh?
And a recommendation.
Fine. Okay. I understand you. You can improve your liquidity by really working with deposits, improving your clients, and coming back to this project. It's really very important to discuss that with a group of DFIs and install, let's say, in 4 important DFIs that you want to set up this scheme of improving a more efficient giving out loans. But I think there's a lot of work to do in order to sensitize the generation of DFIs in Europe. I know how difficult it is now to get the funding. That's my last point is I believe that really we should work with pension funds, improve the relation with pension funds in Africa, and try to get local funding and deposits for obtain the liquidity what you want.
Excellent. Slim?
Thank you. I need to copyright the orchestration thing because somebody else has been using this afternoon. So we need, yes, not just capital, but orchestrating the capital. And I need to, I think, say one thing in general. We need to manage expectations. I know all of us came here, I think, with huge expectations. And at the end, I think the 80-20 rule advice will bury 20% of the time, the resources, and the people. If we can achieve 80% of what was expected from this forum, I think it's amazing. And I believe we've done more than that. So I go back to my new friend Pierre, an alumnus, managing expectations. I mean, we can't do everything, all of us combined. We try, but we can, each one of us can do something and build on it. So in my case, in my humble opinion, and with all due humbleness, with the head of Alternative Path Partners, what we can do is play a role acting as connectors between local and international capital and African opportunities across all the capital structure, private equity, private credit, like public markets. And it's amazing to discover hidden gems like Mansa here and Hassan here. So I look forward to becoming, hopefully, an investor in this amazing entrepreneurial story, and many of them. There's 1.6 billion people in Africa, growing at 350 million every decade. So the potential is just mind-boggling. And so as a concluding remark, and once again, it's very frustrating for someone who loves to talk about Africa, is very passionate. What I'll say is a simple thought. And once again, thank you so much for sticking around. This is stamina. I mean, everyone here needs a prize. I don't know, APO, Nelly, and at the PSC, and everyone, you need to give them prizes, all of them. So what we're doing here today matters because bringing together policymakers, investors, practitioners, etc., all together is already part of the solution. Et l'union fait la force. I go back to strength in numbers. But we now need to go one step further. Yes, we'll build on this. from conversations and discussions into execution. And execution is right here, right here. I mean, there's execution. I don't think we should be, I think, too negative about things. The glass is more than half full, definitely more than half full. And the opportunities are there. Capital is there. We talked about it. So we can just, play a transformative role altogether. What is missing, once again, is the connection. And I think many of us around here are playing that role of connectors or orchestrators or whatever you want to call it now. And therefore, the plumbing and all of those words, I think hopefully they resonate with some of you. And it's important to have these kind of, I think, reflections to walk away with. So what I'd say is, once again, thank you again to the organizers. Thank you, moderator. You've done an amazing job. You've prepared so well. And thank you for making this discussion possible, enjoyable, and intellectually stimulating. Still one. No, I know. And unfortunately, I have to pass the mic.
Thank you very much. Anthony.
Thank you, Zan. I think one of the questions that we really need to look at is about appropriate regulation. So we've seen the unintended consequences, Basel III, making the financial system safer, makes it more difficult to lend long-term, especially for infrastructure, anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism, makes banks reluctant to operate in Africa. It drives capital away. We need to address these. And then finally, let's look at the instruments that work. The Just Energy Transition Partnerships, South Africa, Indonesia, now in Senegal as well, are innovative financial mechanisms that got huge problems, but they can be made to work. The World Bank's credit guarantee vehicle is an innovative structure. How is it working in practice? Let's actually not get distracted and use what we have on the ground.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you for sharing your insights, and congratulations to the organizers, because we're in Brussels, but it's great to have a discussion in Brussels where the focus where the focus is on Africa and not necessarily on Europe. So in that sense, I think it's very encouraging to see that there's this new drive for an African financial architecture, and that it starts from Africa. I would perhaps just conclude by saying that while the dynamics has to start from Africa, and it's an African project for Africa, Africa cannot operate as a nation. So I think it is also important to consider which are the partners, the international community, in particular in this world that is quite in turmoil and fragmented. And in Europe, there has been a lot of times and discussions on the European financial architecture as well. And there are perhaps some lessons and shortcuts that Africa could take to not go through the long-winded routes that some of in Europe we have taken, trying to address the financial architecture and being very connected. And I conclude by saying, you said that money talk. I would conclude by saying, well, let's walk the talk. Thank you very much.